Hello, my name is Bailey DeSepoli, and today I'm going to be talking about my final thoughts for digital comm. And, I really want to talk about what I gained from this class. So, my comfort level with technology exponentially increased because of this class. And I discovered new ways to communicate with my students and, present information to them in a positive and, not overloading way. I also found new ways to assess my students. I really new perspectives on that, and I gained better research habits. And most importantly, I can now more critically think about lesson planning and how to go about it and how intricate it really is. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was technology. Before I started this class, kind of a disclaimer, I had a pretty big aversion to technology. After I was in this class, I found out that it's really nothing to be afraid of, and that there are different things that you can use to your advantage. I figured out how to use Kaltura, which seems like a small step, but for me it was a large step. And I figured out, better ways to use YouTube so that I could use YouTube as a platform to get things into, to get my assignments in and whatnot. And I also found out about Storyboard and Blend for my final project, so I really did learn a lot about technology, and I learned that it can be a pretty cool platform to present information on. Another big thing that I learned from this class was communication and how to properly communicate with your students, because I kind of had this notion before that I was just going to speak at my students and they were going to, retain, write down, they would somehow bring it with them, but that's really not, it's not realistic of me. So, one of the most important things that I learned about the communication thing is that there are ways to get to your students and reach your students outside of school. Earlier in the semester, I looked into Quizlet and I found out that there are actually more things than just the flashcards and just like the testing yourself aspect of Quizlet. You can create classes. So I could create these and I could send the links home with the kids, and they could go on with their parents, they could go on by themselves, they could test themselves, figure out how they're doing. And so really, the communication can extend beyond the classroom. On the other end of that spectrum, the communication spectrum, I also learned that there can be too much, that for anyone, not just, middle school students, if you throw too much at them, they're going to be overwhelmed, and eventually your brain just sort of starts to shut down. And this is called cognitive overload. This is actually something I'd never heard of before, but it made a lot of sense to me, and it made sense as to why, some classes were so overwhelming for me back when I was in middle school, high school, and now. Um, but it's definitely something that I want to be aware of when I'm in the classroom so that I'm not throwing too much at my students at once. I was able to improve I would say, my perspective on assessment through this class, and that was really amazing. I found that I really had kind of like a one-way track thinking about assessment. I thought, you give kids quizzes, you give kids projects, essays, blah, 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 in order to figure out where they are in a class. However, I thought that I was able to think about, how many different learners there are out there, and that students don't always come to the same conclusions when you're giving them information. So one kid might do really good with an artistic project. One kid might do really bad with that. So it's appropriate, and it's something that my teachers did not do, but I want to do. I want to give kids options for assessment. I want to keep it fair, but I also want my students to, feel as if they're being assessed in a way that they can understand. Whether they're tuning into their artistic side or whether they're very good writers, or if they're just good at multiple choice quizzes and they're good at just regurgitating information. I think that I think it's positive to kind of go in the direction of letting students, come up with the assessments themselves almost. Um, and another thing that really helped me out was my research habits. Before this class, I sort of would just throw things into Google and hope for the best, hope to find something scholarly and whatnot. But through the UC library, through like EBSCOhost and a few other databases that we looked at, I found that you can really condense your time and you can just make it very specific. And these entities will get you right where you need to go. And so that was extremely helpful, as a college student. Um, the most important thing, though, that I learned was about lesson planning and how intricate lesson planning can be. The final project, that we worked on for a good amount of this semester really showed me that lesson planning is not just something that you throw together. Um, Lesson planning, you have to think about what you want the kids to understand. You want to think of how you're going to assess them. We already discussed how many different ways you can assess children. So, but you have to do it fairly. So there has to be rubrics, and this is all just for one lesson plan. And there are so many different mediums now that you can use. Like I said earlier, my group and I use Blendspace. We use Storybird. You could use Quizlet. I also mentioned that earlier. There's so many different areas that you can go to have kids create, and that can help assess them. And for the kids, it doesn't even really feel like assessment. So, lesson planning can be this creative and pretty fun thing. But it is definitely very intricate, and I did not consider before this class just how detailed you have to be. So, to wrap things up, I really upped my technology usage through this class and really thought about ways to utilize it in my classroom. I feel like my communication skills are definitely, as an educator, have improved, and I want to continue to work on them. I thought about cognitive overload and what that means to me, how I plan to prevent it. My perspective on assessment really has taken quite the leaps and bounds that I wish that it had earlier. And my research methods are getting so much better than they used to be, and that's always positive. But definitely the most important thing I learned was, how to lesson plan and how to really get to the important part of it. So thank you for helping me out with this class and helping me gain some things.